people that we wanted to engage more and more was private sector. We thought that this moment of development in Vietnam and this sort of incoming ESG was an opportunity to help private sector understand their role, and we wanted to help support that.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with amazing people around the world about the work they're doing in mission-driven organizations as entrepreneurs, investors. My goal is to help inspire and equip the next generation here. There's a lot of people that reach out that are looking to solve challenges, environmental, social, economic, governance, community related, and they're trying to find the models for themselves. Should they be entrepreneurs? Should they be intrapreneurs? How can they have an impact? And in this episode, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Ms. Van Lee, who is a partner at Raise Partners, a social environmental impact consulting practice in Vietnam. Van, I've known for a while now, and she is full of energy. And according to her bio, she thrives in brokering partnerships, mobilizing people behind the social impact programs and initiatives, and helping others communicate about the impact they're making in communities and around the world. And so with that, Van, it's great to have you here to join us to talk about the work you're doing down there, and more importantly, the mission that you're on.
Wow, what an intro. Thanks for having me, Rich. It was full on.
All right, so as a starting point, would you mind introducing yourself and the mission that you're on?
My name is Van Lee, as Rich mentioned, co-founder of Raise Partners Vietnam, which is a social impact and environmental impact consulting and ESG consulting firm. I'm originally from Chicago. I've been living in Vietnam for over 16 years now. What I wanted to do in terms of mission was support people with their good works, like the amazing sort of change makers that I have found my way radiating towards. I always wanted to support their work and find a way to bring that to scale and expand on that, right? And so I would say that my mission also now involves building a community of those kinds of people and still supporting people's work to do better in this case in Vietnam.
How did you land in the space, and what catalyzed you into it?
My parents are Vietnam War refugees. I grew up with the idea that there are very difficult things happening in the world, and I was very sensitive to those issues. And the question was, how do we bring really difficult challenges to an end? How do we approach communities? How do we make people feel included? And so then I think I just naturally was attracted to work that helps support people.
It sounds like that was baked in very early. How is it expressing itself, I guess, as you're coming up through high school, college, that made the transition to Vietnam? Were you always working with nonprofits? Did you study development? Like, how did that express itself?
So number one, I grew up in a very progressive town in a suburb of Chicago called Oak Park. Growing up in Oak Park, one of the things they really hammer into you is promoting the diversity of that town, of all the citizens in the town. And so you surround yourself with people who are interested in what's going on in the world. And so I remember one of the first campaigns I was a part of was a school supply drive for schools in El Salvador. And so that got me started, at least in terms of getting interested in how do you mobilize people to do stuff for other people in another place. From there, then I got really interested in issues having to do with HIV, AIDS. So I learned all about that as much as I could as like a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, 17-year-old. And then from there, I just didn't stop. And then in university, I meant to study French. I was going to be a French teacher, but then I just kept getting pulled into politics, and I was studying in Washington, D.C., which to me was the center of the universe at that moment. And that led me to my first job. And then that moved me to finally deciding to move to Vietnam and see what inclusive development could look like and how could people contribute and participate to that.
And what was Vietnam like when you arrived 16 years ago in that space? I mean, if I think back 16 years ago in China, it was just very little happening in terms of like organized movements, right? Like, and what were some of the early things that you did in the country, and what issues were you able to get involved with? And were you working for international NGOs, local NGOs, or what were your first steps there?
My first step was actually a sort of reality check, because I came in thinking, oh, I've worked for NGOs in the US already, so everybody will want to hire me, I'm sure, without having the sort of Vietnamese language skills to do the kinds of program work that I wanted to do. Vietnam has done a lot of work in terms of healthcare, investing in education, investing in the people of Vietnam. And so the development that had happened before I arrived in 2007 is huge. And so I didn't necessarily come with an expectation of what I would do or what needed to happen next, I'll say. And so what was super important about that first job I got in the NGO world was that I worked for East Meets West Foundation, which was an NGO that worked on water, sanitation, and health. And I got to be a fundraiser on that team, which was actually the right position for me because I didn't have Vietnamese language skills, but it enabled me to see the work that was being done in the field and translate that to donors, to corporate sponsors, and so I was in that funny sort of middle group, and that was like a perfect position, right, to translate what was happening from my Vietnamese colleagues to American donors.
16 years ago, doing that work, being exposed to, a lot of those issues, I've always viewed that as like fundamental. Like that's where you learn the things that are valuable and important, and you understand so much about stakeholders and things that are working. So what were some of the experiences you took away from that time, and how did that time shape you into over the next, say, 15, 16 years?
Yeah, that job was hugely transformative for me because on the one side, what I could see from the program team, right, was how they live in the communities where they're working. So it's not like you have people helicoptering in and out. So one, understanding the real needs of what a community is looking for. And then on the other side of that, bridging that, I learned from the other side, the sort of interests of donors, right? And how do you bridge those two things? And so understanding how that whole ecosystem worked, huge for me. And also understanding the Vietnamese government, the way the Vietnamese government works in rural communities, also those entrance points for those partnerships was super important. And I've taken that now into the work that we do today.
So let's talk about the work you're doing today. Raise Partners, co-founder. What is the organization and what's the vision for Raise Partners?
We had a vision, but we didn't have like a specific solutions or services behind us. What we knew was that so Mimi and I actually have a very similar skill set. We do love building partnerships together. And also we love this sort of ecosystem building. We love convening people. We love bringing people together and then seeing what comes out the other side. And so we knew that there were topics and issues that we wanted to approach, but all of it fits under the umbrella of like how do we build partnerships that support really inclusive and sustainable development in Vietnam, and what does that look like? It was really important to us that we only worked with people that we liked, and I know that is a weird sentence and that sounds strange and also sounds very airy-fairy, but I think what it came down to was that we wanted to work with partners that we felt had integrity and also same kind of intention, positive intention. And that had to be the entrance point. And so from there, we started to look at what we did well as a team. And Mimi and I have very similar skill set. We also have very similar aspirations for some of the issues where we want to have impact. Mimi and I are very passionate about gender equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion in Vietnam. We are very passionate about labor issues, supply chain issues. So those we tend to lean more on the social impact side of our projects than, say, governance. And then environmental impact is also something super important to us.
It sounds awfully NGO-y, awfully international development organization. Like, with that idea that you want to work with who you like and you want to work on these specific issues. Who were the buyers of that initial product that you were trying to put out there?
So originally when we were coming together and starting Raise, we thought, okay, are we a social enterprise or are we a consulting company? And I think it became very clear that we wanted to be a company. And that wasn't necessarily because we wanted to get millions of dollars and get paid or something. We wanted to change the way that we engaged people. So originally we did think that we were going to engage mostly NGOs because we were very good at building partnerships for NGOs. And we're very good at training and empowering people inside NGOs to think about how they find partners, to think about how they articulate their impact, right? And we realized that actually people that we wanted to engage more and more was private sector, that we thought that this moment of development in Vietnam and this sort of incoming of ESG was an opportunity to help private sector understand their role in the economy in Vietnam and really do some very amazing, impactful jobs. And we wanted to help support that. And then at the same time, we wanted private sector to understand more about NGO sector and and protect the space for them, honestly, because NGO sector sometimes can feel a little bit squeezed in Vietnam. And so we wanted to make sure to bridge that by building partnerships between private sector and NGOs.
But I mean, fundamentally, I'm curious, like, why leave nonprofits and leave, say, that profession to become consultants and generalists? What was the different impact you thought you could have by coming together?
We actually did not want to be stuck under the umbrella of one NGO with one cause and one theme and one topic. We wanted to be able to really challenge ourselves with different kinds of new project areas, right? One issue that we're still really interested in is circular economy and reducing plastics in Vietnam. So especially in the Mekong Delta. And so that was a topic that we wanted to be able to do without having sort of the framing of somebody else telling us that we had to, you were working for a children's charity, you're only going to do this work. And so we wanted to be able to spread into different places.
What's the environment like in Vietnam right now for sustainability and ESG? I mean, the last few years, it seems like a lot of energy coming out of COVID particularly. Like, talk to me about what's going on there right now. What's the energy like, and how are you guys involved in this? Like,
it's very dynamic. So if we look at 3 years ago, Mimi and I were, and the American Chamber of Commerce and the different chambers of commerce and even the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they were still doing topics on what is E and what is S and what is G. At the same time, I don't think anyone has to explain to Vietnam the importance of sustainability. Like, Vietnam is sinking. We have huge tropical storms, right, due to climate change. We've been facing the effects of climate change that people have been denying for years, right? Like, everyone knows what it is. But the question is, what is the role of business and government in tackling those challenges, right? That's, I think, where ESG comes in, and the role of investors in helping to advance some of those positive movements. So while that energy is super dynamic and there's a lot of things happening and there's a huge rush, right, to embrace ESG and start to integrate that into business practices, entrance point is different for different groups of people. So for like big business, right, they've made global commitments. Vietnam has also made amazing global commitments in terms of reducing methane emissions and greenhouse gas, but those commitments are hugely difficult to deliver on without the support of private sector. And so if you look at the more majority SMEs, Vietnamese SMEs, they are just coming into this and they don't know what's coming. They don't know how to start. They don't know how to comply with laws that are being drafted, right? And so at the same time, there's a lot of work that has to be done.
Where do you guys fit into that? Because this is an opportunity. There's a lot of movement. How do you, as consultants, how do you, as raise partners, position yourself in that dynamic?
I think for us, something that's important for us has always been, how do we frame this for Vietnam in a very practical way that is very digestible for people, right? So one of our services that I really am trying to build out is supporting SMEs in ESG. What kind of things do they need to do to sort of start integrating and thinking about their environmental impact, and also thinking about how they engage communities from now on? And that's the work that we want to do next and build that out fast. We need a lot more Vietnamese companies to really come in and understand what's coming, and get excited about that, right? And then do the work.
But is there a big gap between what the international groups are talking about, investing behind, and then the realities to, say, the Vietnamese supply chain right now? Or is that your job to bridge it? Or are you just trying to support one and hope that they can find their own bridge across?
So the larger Vietnamese corporations, they absolutely know what their customers want. So for example, BTS is a big company that came to our conference this year, and they have European customers. So actually the standards that they have to comply with for their customers are a much higher standard than like the legal standard that we have to comply with. International investors do get excited about certain trendy words, like, for example, nature-based solutions. So one of the reasons why we had that in the conference was actually I wanted to frame what that looks like in Vietnam now and what is possible and what are the barriers, because actually there's a very limited amount of stuff that can happen right now. And where do we need to go next in order for that to move, right? And so I wanted the investors to air out what they thought could happen next and where they needed policy to go and where they needed private sector to go, right, in order to make those things happen.
One of the things I found interesting about that conversation, and it's something I have here, or it doesn't matter where I am, is that these investors, particularly from outside, they have all the money, they have all the buzzwords, they have all the intention to be authentic, but then they don't know anything actually on the ground. How do you approach that? Like, how do you help tell that story? Is it just events and blog posts, or like, what are some ways that you and Mimi are trying to get that story out so that better decisions, better investments, and more impact could be made?
A big part of that is the way that we convene, and the way that we're trying to build different partnerships. But then also there's stuff going on, behind the scenes too. So for the investor side, help them understand what's happening in Vietnam with more quieter sort of briefings, right? But also connecting them to like really interesting entrepreneurs here who are doing amazing things. On the entrepreneur side too, like I mean, there's things happening too on the entrepreneur side, but I was also listening to the sort of challenges from the entrepreneurs on what is available for them, right? How do they get their stories out? How do they go to scale? Also, sometimes they don't, there's a lot of challenges in even knowing how to articulate about their product and their services, right? And their 5-year plan. I mean, I have that problem too. So how do we continue to sort of keep that momentum up, right? Is, I think, the important question.
What's behind the movement right now? Like, what's driving the community to come together and to want to really move forward? Like, is it just a recognition the problems are too big, or is it just seeing the opportunities and be like, wow, there's a lot that we can do here? Like, what do you see as driving the movement, and who are critical to it right now?
I would say, so Vietnam is always going to be a super entrepreneurial country. We have that in our culture. It will always be driven by a sense of, oh my God, there's an opportunity. That's just how we are. There's a moment for change. There is an opportunity, and I'm going to run after that. Like that's very much a very positive sort of feature of Vietnamese culture, is this optimism. At the same time, I think also there's a need, right? And I will say Vietnamese also have a very strong, we are very strategic people. So I think one, you can see the climate finance, you can see that some of this huge social development financing is coming. And so how do you access it? How do you make sure that that's, deployed in the right places? That's going to be but that is for sure motivational.
What I found here was that you had this movement, you have a big gap, and there's different roles for government, private market, consumers to play. Who now is kind of in a leading position? Like, is it regulators who are pushing this and therefore making the business case for investors? Is it the market actually rewiring itself to find the business case by itself? Who are the leading, I guess, groups that are bringing that all together?
I think it's still the market. I think also Vietnam being a major manufacturing hub for European clients, for international customers, those big brands are still driving. They're still driving where the conversation is going. They're driving the sort of urgency for Vietnamese companies to comply. Regulation is definitely part of that conversation, but the driver still is, how do we win those customers?
Now, when it's driven by, US or European companies, that often solves their problem. Does solving their problem solve Vietnam's problem as well?
I sort of take advantage of the fact of the international brands and the customers as the entrance point, but I also know that this does not solve the problem. So for example, renewable energies is a good example of this. The last year, everyone was talking about renewable energy, rooftop solar, which is great because we're talking about the demands of power, but it was also being driven by big customers. The question also is, in the future, is with this energy transition, how do we make sure that that's an inclusive thing? How do SMEs, how do households access green energy, right? And the savings that come with it? Those questions are not necessarily being heard, right? Because the driver is the big customer.
Okay, so you have all these foreign companies that are coming in, they're bringing best practice. What is your role as RAISE partners or as conveners to help share best practices?
We do enjoy all that convening. We do enjoy the showcasing. Number one, because it means doing the things that I love to do anyway, which is going and finding those inspiring stories, right? And then making sure that those stories are being heard. So what there are amazing Vietnamese companies that are doing great things at their scale. And so finding those stories, I love finding them, telling them, helping to give praise to them. At the same time, I feel like our services is also about, so yes, showcasing best practices, but then also working with companies on integrating what their mission is, what they want to do with their company, and then finding ways that they will be able to integrate sustainability inside of, their mission. That piece of work is stuff that we also like to do.
And does that mean that more Vietnamese companies are coming to you and asking for consulting, advisory, ongoing support now?
Yeah, I mean, for the last couple of years. So, there's a lot of family-based companies that want to do better or see, for example, we got approached by a company that makes fans, and they made fans for generations, right? But then they realized that all those plastic blades must be going somewhere. So what should they do? Or for example, there are companies that are already doing amazing things. So one of our favorite clients is some guy distillery. In their DNA, they work in highland communities and rural communities and work with them to source amazing botanicals for their gin. They now have other products too, honey, amaro. And those communities also happen to be ethnic minority communities. That was from the beginning. The idea of ESG, of then mapping that out and writing it on a sort of diagram to them was not very exciting. But these are things that investors are asking them, right? What are you doing in S? What are you doing in E? They can talk about it all day, but they don't know what is the E and what is the S and what is the G. Right? So it's that kind of stuff that helps them expand. That I love that kind of work.
What are some of the common things that you're helping them do, and what are some of the challenges to delivering that right now?
So I think that for me, that's the biggest challenge is like, yes, we're ready. And then you tell them what it entails, and they're like, no, forget it.
But okay, what's behind that? Is it because it just costs too much money, or it's going to take too much time, or it's not as easy as they thought, or like?
I think they worry about how much it takes from the profit making side, right? Which I can understand. And it just means that then that it wasn't scoped well for them. They did not understand what was gonna come in, how much work it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's nowhere to round that peg sometimes.
Yeah, I think we're still working out the best ways to find the clients that will go all the way.
What about the community of people? How has that changed over the last few years? I feel like a lot more people have come in, a lot of young energy. What's going on there, and how does that help this movement kind of continue forward as well?
A lot more energy, a lot more. What is great is a lot of young people who are really engaged and excited about sustainability. I think, what we can just even see from the conference last week and then the conference last year is the excitement that people have for this now. So that's positive. And also you see a lot of young Vietnamese coming with master's degrees, with environmental science degrees, with, social work degrees, coming back to Vietnam and really throwing themselves at this work, which is awesome also. And then even internally inside Vietnam, there's a lot of programs building up sort of green jobs. And yes, that is a hugely positive thing. And that is also what helps, continue to drive, I think, me and Mimi is seeing that. So there's definitely areas of opportunity that I can see that are blossoming because there are a growing number of people who are excited about it. And that's good.
Like, how do you maintain your energy? Do you just focus on those areas of opportunity and kind of put aside the rest, or you give 80% to high energy and 20% to hard stuff? Like, how do you personally tackle so much? Because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of movement. How do you maintain your energy?
I'm just a high energy person. Also, Mimi, my business partner, also high energy. We're very similar that way. But I think most of it is also because we sort of thrive off of the people that we work around and with, right? And so that helps keep us excited about what's going on. And I think we just also give ourselves time to reflect, remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing, how do we do it, and how do we do it better, right? And that just keeps us, it keeps us happy.
What have you learned about yourself through this experience? Both through your time in Vietnam, but also the work that you do. Like, what have you found that you're good at? What do you enjoy? What are you finding meaning in?
I mean, I know I keep saying it, but I do really love to build groups of people together. I love building teams. I love building teams, but having them focus on one central mission that then they run after, right? And then when that project is done, then there's another coming and another coming and another coming. And having the outcomes of all of those things be positive is something that's important to me. And so it just happens to be that the sector of work that we're working in, social sector, is something has impact and teeth, right? And so I am very proud of that work, and I'm proud of how I've sort of built my career around that kind of stuff.
Do you miss the days of having just that one, being on that team and being singularly focused, or no?
Nope,
You love
nope,
the
nope. I love being able to juggle I mean, sometimes, of course, if you see me on my worst day, I'm complaining about how much I'm juggling, right? But in actuality, I love being able to work in different areas with different groups of people and seeing good things come out of that, right?
All right. So, a couple pieces of advice to young professionals, students who are learning from you. They want to build a mission, they want to build a mission-driven career. What are a couple things that they should do that would get them a little bit further along on their path?
One thing I would say to young people is not to be too rigid, to be really open to like the opportunities and the changes in the road that are coming, right? So you can have your mission, definitely for sure. Keep to that. There will be people that will sometimes question that, and you have to be able to articulate why you do what you do. And I think that's really important for a mission-based person. And so being able to continue to communicate and at the same time listen and move forward and then go on that curvy path is the key. And so not being rigid, being open-minded, and having a really open heart towards that mission is something that's super important.